The phone call came on a Tuesday like any other, choked with the acrid scent of turpentine and the gnawing emptiness that even a full bottle of cheap whiskey couldn't quite fill. My studio, a converted warehouse space overlooking the grimy docks, was my sanctuary and my cage. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak afternoon sun, illuminating canvases that marked me with their unfinished potential. I'd been staring at a blank one for 3 days, the white expanse a vast, marking void. My hands, usually steady enough to coax life from oil and pigment, trembled as I reached for the phone, the cheap plastic cool against my clammy palm. "Dean," a reedy voice, unfamiliar yet laced with a distant echo of recognition, crackled through the receiver. "Speaking," I managed, my voice rough from disuse. "This is Mr. Abernathy, from Abernathy and Sons Solicitors." He paused, and I could almost hear the rustle of paper, the dry cough of age. "I'm afraid I have some news regarding my grandmother, Elena Vance." My grandmother, Elena Vance, the name tasted like ash. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in 20 years, not since Lila. The memory, a jagged shard of glass, scraped at the back of my throat. "What about her?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. The knuckles of my left hand turned white. "I'm afraid she passed away last week, Mr. Vance," peacefully. "We're told, but there's more. She left I something, quite substantial in fact." A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Substantial. Elena Vance had lived like a pauper, hoarding every penny. "What is it?" "Her estate, Blackwood Manor, and its contents." Blackwood Manor. The name itself was a whisper of decay, a phantom limb of my childhood I'd tried to sever. The vast, sprawling Victorian monstrosity perched on a cliff overlooking the churning grey sea, the place where my nightmares had been born. I don't understand," I stammered. "Why would she leave me anything, especially that place?" He was quite insistent, mister. "The will is clear. I am the sole heir." The sole heir to Blackwood Manor. A place I had fled, a place I had buried deeper than any forgotten trauma. The air in my studio suddenly felt heavy, charged with an invisible static. I could almost smell the damp rot, the musty scent of forgotten things. "When do I need to come?" "The keys and relevant documents will be ready for collection at our office at my earliest convenience. We've also arranged for a caretaker to be present at the manor. A Mr. Silas, I believe. Caretaker." I pictured a stoic, weathered man, a bulwark against the house's secrets. "Thank I, Mr. Abernathy." I hung up, the dial tone a harsh, abrupt sound. I stood there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. Lila. The two were inextricably linked, two sides of the same cursed coin. I hadn't thought of Lila in years, not consciously anyway. I walked to the window, my gaze drifting past the industrial wasteland of the docks. The sky was a bruised purple, the first stars pricking through the haze. I was an artist, a man of logic and observation, but Blackwood Manor, I needed to go. I had to, not for the inheritance, not for any sense of duty. Waiting. And if I didn't go to her, it would eventually find her way back to me. Asterisk. Days later, the drive felt like a descent. The familiar highway gave way to winding country lanes, the trees pressing closer, their branches' skeletal fingers reaching for my car. Something ancient and decaying. Blackwood Manor loomed at the end of a long, overgrown drive, a silhouette against a sky the color of old bruises. It was even more imposing, more desolate than I remembered. Turrets like broken teeth, windows like vacant eyes. The caretaker, Silas, was waiting on the porch. He was older than I'd expected, his face a roadmap of hard living, his eyes a pale, unsettling blue. He didn't offer a handshake, just a curt nod. "Mr. Vance," he rasped, his voice like gravel. The doll. She's been kept safe. In the nursery. The nursery. The room I had tried so hard to forget. Silas's words were a key turning in a rusted lock, opening a door I'd bolted shut. The air grew thick, suffocating. My chest felt tight, a band of iron constricting my lungs. I need to see the security office. I blurted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. The thought of the guard break room, security monitors showing static, a place meant to observe, to control, suddenly seemed like a bizarre, desperate refuge. Silas frowned, his pale eyes narrowing. The security office. It's been out of order for years. The monitors just show static. Still, I insisted, my voice a little too loud, a little too desperate. "I need to see it." He shrugged, a slow, deliberate movement. "As you wish." He led me through the cavernous foyer, the air thick with the scent of dust and something faintly floral, like dried roses left too long. Shadows clung to the high ceilings, and the silence was broken only by the creak of our footsteps on the decaying floorboards. We passed a grand staircase, its banister carved with leering gargoyles. We reached a small, windowless room off a dimly lit corridor. The guard break room, security monitors showing static. 3 bulky, old-fashioned televisions sat on a metal desk, their screens a uniform, hissing grey. Wires snaked across the floor like dead vines. It was a monument to disuse, a forgotten corner of a forgotten house. "See," Silas said, his voice flat. I stared at the screens, the static a familiar, nerving presence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Why had I come here? What was I looking for in this useless room? And as the static pulsed, a faint, almost imperceptible flicker caught my eye on the far left monitor. Was it a trick of the light, or was something moving within that endless grey? The solicitor, a man whose suit seemed too sharp for the crumbling grandeur of Blackwood Manor, finally stepped back, leaving me alone in the echoing foyer. His final words, a polite but firm dismissal, still hung in the air, a dry rustle like dead leaves skittering across stone. "The keys are yours, Mr. Dean. The property is yours, all of it." He then retreated to his polished sedan, vanishing down the overgrown driveway as if eager to shed the oppressive aura of the place. Now the silence pressed in, a physical weight. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a charged stillness, as if the very air held its breath. My own breathing sounded unnaturally loud, a ragged counterpoint to the house's slow decay. The scent of dust was a dry, gritty blanket, but beneath it that faint, cloying sweetness persisted, like a phantom perfume. I ran a hand along the intricately carved banister of the grand staircase. The wood felt cool and strangely slick beneath my fingertips, despite the thick layer of dust. It was an unsettling texture, not quite damp, not quite oily, just wrong. They writhed at the edges of my vision, subtle shifts that I could never quite pin down. My grandmother. I barely remembered her, a distant figure shrouded in the same hazy gloom that now permeated this house. Estranged was the word the solicitor had used. Estranged. It felt too sterile for the tangled knot of guilt and resentment that had always coiled in my gut whenever her name surfaced. She'd been the keeper of Lila, hadn't she? The one who'd kept the doll locked away, or so my parents had claimed. I started my exploration in earnest, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress. The drawing room was a tableau of arrested decay. Furniture draped in white sheets stood like spectral figures. A grand piano, its keys yellowed and chipped, sat silent, a monument to forgotten melodies. On a side table, a silver-framed photograph lay face down. I hesitated, my fingers tracing the cool, tarnished metal before I turned it over. It was my grandmother. Younger, her face severe, her eyes holding a flicker of something I couldn't decipher: amusement, cruelty. Beside her, propped on a velvet cushion, sat Lila. Her porcelain skin, once smooth and delicate, was now marred by fine cracks, like a spiderweb spun across her face. A tiny, fixed smile was painted on her lips, a smile that seemed to mark me from across the years. I quickly turned the photograph back over. Further into the house, I found a series of interconnected rooms that seemed to have been used for security. A small, windowless chamber, smelling faintly of stale coffee and something metallic, was designated as the guard break room, security monitors showing static. 3 bulky CRT monitors lined one wall, their screens alive with the frantic dance of snow. They flickered and buzzed, displaying nothing but an agitated grey chaos. There were no cameras visible, no obvious source for this broadcast of noise. It felt like a deliberate attempt to blind anyone watching, to obscure what was happening beyond the frame. I stood there for a long moment, the rhythmic static a low thrum against my eardrums, a sound that felt more like a presence than an absence. It was here, in a small, cramped study, that I found it. A child's drawing, tacked haphazardly to a corkboard. Crude, crayon lines depicted a stick figure, me, I assumed, standing beside a doll. The doll, however, was not the smiling, vacant thing of my memories. Red crayon, thick and smeared, circled the doll. Beneath it, scrawled in a childish hand that was undeniably my own, were the words, "She won't let me go." The static from the guard break room seemed to seep into this room, a low hum that vibrated in my teeth. The smell of dried roses was stronger here, sickly sweet and cloying. I backed away from the drawing, my breath catching in my throat. How had it gotten here? I remembered drawing it, a desperate, frantic act from a time I'd tried so hard to forget. But I hadn't seen it in decades. Had my grandmother kept it? Or had Lila found it? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. The static on the monitors continued its relentless, meaningless dance. What were they trying to hide? The air in the guard break room was thick, heavy with the scent of stale coffee and something else. Something floral but wrong. It clung to the back of my throat, a phantom perfume that made my stomach churn. I stared at the drawing on the table, the rough charcoal lines stark against the cheap paper. It was Lila, not a representation, but her. The exact tilt of her head, the unnerving stillness in her painted eyes, the way her tiny stitched mouth seemed perpetually on the verge of a grimace. I'd drawn it years ago, in a fever dream of a night, trying to purge her from my mind. But here it was. How? My gaze flickered to the bank of security monitors. Each screen displayed a swirling, chaotic snow of static. A low, persistent hum emanated from them, a sound that felt less heard and more felt, a vibration that resonated deep within my bones, rattling my teeth. The guard break room, with its chipped linoleum floor and the faint, metallic tang of disinfectant, felt like a trap. My hand trembled as I reached for the drawing, my fingers brushing against the rough texture of the paper. It was real. This wasn't a hallucination. I remembered drawing it. I remembered the cold sweat that slicked my palms, the frantic scratching of charcoal against paper in my childhood bedroom. It was a desperate attempt to capture her, to understand the terror she inflicted. But this drawing, it was too perfect, too immediate. It was as if it had been drawn moments ago, by a hand that knew her intimately. My grandmother. Her Victorian mansion, now mine, was a mausoleum of her eccentricities. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating piles of antique furniture draped in white sheets, stacks of brittle books, and the pervasive, cloying scent of dried roses. I'd been systematically going through her belongings, hoping to find some semblance of order, some clue to the life she'd lived apart from me. It raised gooseflesh on my arms. The static on the monitors seemed to intensify, the hum a palpable pressure against my eardrums. I backed away from the table, my eyes scanning the room, searching for, I didn't know what, a hidden door, a secret passage, anything that could explain the drawing's presence. My gaze fell upon an old, ornate wooden chest tucked away in a corner, half hidden by a moth-eaten tapestry. It was the kind of thing my grandmother would hoard, filled with forgotten treasures and hidden histories. My fingers traced them, feeling the raised edges, the cool, unyielding surface. It felt ancient, imbued with a weight that had nothing to do with its physical mass. With a groan of protesting hinges, I lifted the heavy lid. The smell of dried roses intensified, a suffocating wave that made me gag. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed lace and faded velvet, was a doll. My breath hitched. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain face chipped and discolored, her painted blue eyes staring blankly ahead. Her dress, once a vibrant crimson, was now faded to a rusty brown, the lace trim frayed and brittle. Her yarn hair, a muddy blonde, was matted and tangled, but there was no mistaking her. The same unnerving stillness, the same subtle cruelty in the curve of her stitched lips. He was exactly as I'd drawn her. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through me. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. This was impassable. He was gone. I had seen her. What? My mind recoiled, refusing to complete the thought. The memories were buried deep, locked away behind layers of fear and denial, but the doll. Her presence here in my grandmother's things, in this house that felt increasingly like a tomb. It was a confirmation of my deepest anxieties. She hadn't been a figment of my childish imagination. He was real, and he was here. A wave of nausea washed over me. The dried roses seemed to bloom in my nostrils, their sweet decay a harbinger of something far more sinister. The static seemed to pulse with a malevolent rhythm, syncing with my own rising panic. How long had she been waiting? The floral scent, sickly sweet, was definitely stronger in here. It was the smell of lilies left too long in stagnant water, a cloying sweetness that promised rot beneath. I leaned closer to the drawing, my fingers tracing the jagged charcoal lines. It was a child's rendering, crude and unsettling. A stick figure with wide, vacant eyes stood before a house that looked disturbingly like Grandma's. Beside the stick figure was a doll, Lila. Even in this amateurish sketch, I recognized her. The same porcelain smile, the same vacant stare. But the doll in the drawing had something extra. Tiny, dark tendrils seemed to writhe from its painted fingers, reaching for the stick figure. I shivered, the sudden chill unrelated to the temperature of the guard break room. The security monitors across the room flickered, a kaleidoscope of static. Each screen displayed a scrambled, monochrome world, the cameras themselves seemingly blinded. I'd checked them earlier, a routine task, and they'd been fine. Now nothing but snow. A faint scraping sound, like fingernails on wood, echoed from somewhere beyond the thin walls of the room. I froze, straining to hear. It stopped. Then a soft, rhythmic thudding. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, deliberate, and felt as if it were coming from directly overhead. My own heart, a traitorous thing, began to pick up its pace. I told myself it was the old house settling. Houses like this, with their ancient timbers and forgotten attics, were prone to all sorts of noises. But the sound, it felt too intentional. I picked up the drawing. It was on cheap, yellowed paper, the kind you'd find in a child's art pad. Who had drawn this and when? I'd found it tucked beneath a stack of old newspapers in the library near the fireplace. No name, no date. Just the unnerving depiction of Lila and the stick figure child. The thudding overhead stopped abruptly. Silence descended, a heavy, suffocating blanket. I held my breath, waiting. It was so faint I almost dismissed it as the wind rattling a loose pane, but it was too distinct, a child's voice, high and reedy. It seemed to coil around me, originating from no single point, but from the very air itself. Dean, my name, spoken by that voice. This wasn't just my imagination. This was something else, something real. I stood up, the chair legs scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. I walked over to the door of the guard break room, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. The floral scent was strongest here by the entrance. It felt like a physical presence, a suffocating embrace. I opened the door a crack, peering into the dimly lit hallway. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following my movement. I could have sworn I saw a flash of movement at the far end of the corridor, a flicker of something pale. A child, perhaps. "Hello!" I called out, my voice barely a croak. No answer. Only the creak of the old house, a symphony of groans and sighs that seemed to mark my fear. I stepped out into the hallway, the drawing clutched in my hand. The air here was cooler, but the cloying perfume still clung to me. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing on the polished wood floor. The security monitors in the guard break room were still awash of static, a silent testament to some unseen disruption. As I passed a large grandfather clock, its pendulum still, I heard it again. A child's giggle, light and airy, yet laced with an unnerving malice. It seemed to come from the staircase, the grand, sweeping staircase that led to the upper floors. I took a step towards the stairs, a strange compulsion pulling me forward. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to lock myself in the guard break room and wait for morning. But another part of me, a part I'd long tried to suppress, was curious. It was a morbid, dangerous curiosity, the same curiosity that had drawn me to Lila all those years ago. I reached the foot of the stairs, my eyes fixed on the top. The floral scent was overwhelming here, potent and sickening. It beckoned. What was waiting for me up there? The scraping of the chair legs was a desperate, animal sound in the suffocating quiet. My own breath hitched, a ragged gasp that felt too loud. I forced myself to stand, my muscles stiff, protesting the sudden movement. The linoleum beneath my bare feet was slick with a fine, almost imperceptible film of something. It wasn't dust. It was colder. My eyes darted to the darkened doorway of the guard break room. The stale air, thick with the phantom scent of old coffee and something metallic, seemed to press in on me. I'd found this room earlier, a forgotten alcove filled with derelict furniture and a bank of security monitors, each displaying a fractured landscape of pure static. They were useless, of course, but I'd found a strange solace in their blank indifference. Until now, that voice. It had been so clear, so distinct. It had spoken my name, Dean, as if it knew me, as if it had been waiting. My hand, trembling, reached for the doorknob. I twisted it slowly, the mechanism groaning in protest. The monitors still flickered, their screens a chaotic dance of white noise. But as I stepped inside, a subtle shift occurred. The static seemed to coalesce, to resolve itself into fleeting, almost subliminal images. A flicker of a doll's porcelain eye, the warped, childlike scrawl of a name, my name. I stumbled back, a choked cry escaping my lips. It was the house. It was the stress. It was the lack of sleep. But the images persisted, burning themselves onto my retinas, each one a shard of a forgotten nightmare. My gaze fell upon a dusty workbench in the corner. Tools lay scattered across its surface, coated in a thick layer of grime. And amidst the detritus, something glinted. It was a palette knife, its metal blade dulled with dried paint. Beside it sat a tube of oil paint, a deep, unsettling crimson, the color of old blood. A compulsion, primal and undeniable, seized me. I had to paint. I needed to paint. I found a blank canvas propped against the wall, a forgotten relic of some previous occupant's artistic endeavors. My hands, guided by an unseen force, began to move. I squeezed the crimson paint onto the palette, its thick, oily texture clinging to the knife. The scent was pungent, almost sweet, and it made my stomach churn. My brush, a stiff, bristled thing I'd found discarded near the workbench, dipped into the paint. I began to work, not with the deliberate intention of creation, but with a desperate, almost frenzied energy. The canvas became a battleground for my fractured psyche. Jagged lines, sharp and violent, tore across the surface. Swirls of crimson bled into muddy browns and bruised purples, forming grotesque, unsettling shapes. It wasn't me painting, it was her. Lila, the doll, the one from my childhood, the one I'd tried so desperately to forget. He was here, and he was influencing me. The images from the static-filled monitors began to bleed into my work. The doll's glassy stare, fixed and vacant. The unsettling smile that never quite reached her painted eyes. The childish handwriting, scrawling my name over and over, each iteration more menacing than the last. I painted it all, the fear, the revulsion, the suffocating guilt. My hands were stained with crimson. My clothes were splattered. The air in the guard break room grew heavy, thick with the cloying scent of oil paint and something else, something metallic and vaguely floral. It was the perfume my grandmother used to wear, the same perfume that clung to Lila's worn dress. I stepped back, panting, my chest heaving. The painting was a nightmare made manifest. It was a raw, visceral scream of my buried trauma, a testament to Lila's insidious hold. The doll, rendered in stark, terrifying detail, dominated the canvas, her painted eyes seeming to bore into my soul. Around her, a chaotic swirl of distorted figures, their faces contorted in silent screams, represented the fragments of my shattered memories. Scrawled in a childlike hand, dripping with the same crimson paint that stained my fingers. The guard break room felt smaller now, the static on the monitors a marking chorus to my descent. The air was frigid, raising goose flesh on my arms. The scraping stopped. Silence, thick and heavy, pressed in. My eyes darted to the floor. Nothing. Just the faint, greasy sheen I'd noticed before, clinging to the worn linoleum. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a cold, creeping dread, the kind that settles deep in your bones and whispers of things that should not be. I took a tentative step, then another. My bare feet made no sound. The air in the kitchen was stale, smelling faintly of old grease and something else, something metallic like old pennies. I reached for the doorframe, my fingers brushing against the peeling paint. It felt rough, almost gritty. My gaze drifted to the calendar on the wall, its pages brittle and yellowed. The date was smudged, illegible. How long had I been here? Days? Weeks? Time had become a fluid, unreliable thing since I'd returned. Lila's presence, a constant hum beneath the surface of my awareness, seemed to warp it, stretching and compressing moments until they lost all meaning. I had to know. I had to understand what this place was, what Lila was. The attic. That was where it all began, wasn't it? My grandmother had always forbidden me from going up there, her voice sharp with a fear I hadn't understood then. Now, the memory of her warnings felt like a key, a clue to a locked door. The attic stairs groaned under my weight, each step a protest. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, piercing the gloom from a grimy window. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of forgotten things left to rot. Old trunks, draped in cobwebs, loomed like silent sentinels. And in the center of the room, bathed in that solitary beam of light, sat Lila. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain skin cracked and yellowed, her glass eyes vacant, yet somehow they seemed to follow me. Her painted smile was a frozen rictus, a mockery of joy. Around her lay scattered remnants of my childhood, a wooden soldier, a faded teddy bear with one button eye, a collection of chipped marbles. They were like offerings, sacrifices laid at her feet. My hands trembled as I reached for an old wooden chest near the doll. It was locked. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers closing around the small, tarnished key I'd found in my grandmother's desk. It fit. The lock clicked open with a soft, final sound. Inside, beneath layers of brittle lace and yellowed newspaper clippings, I found a journal. The leather cover was worn smooth, the pages filled with my grandmother's spidery script. Her words painted a picture I couldn't bear to look at, yet couldn't tear my eyes away from. She wrote of Lila not as a doll, but as a vessel for something old, something hungry. And then I found the entry about me. He sees her too, the script read, the ink a little bolder, a little shakier. The child, the same way I did, the doll. It feeds on innocence. It craves the fear. I tried to protect him. I locked it away. But it finds its way back. It always finds its way back. My breath hitched. The metallic tang in the air suddenly felt stronger, sharper, I remembered. Not just the vague unease, but the specifics. The way she'd made the soldier march, the bear nod its head. The night she'd made the marbles roll across the floor, forming a pattern, a word I couldn't quite grasp. They hadn't seen it. They never saw it. And my grandmother, he had just held me, her own eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. He had tried to protect me. But he had also been bound to it, just as I was now. The journal detailed her own desperate attempts to appease the entity, to understand its hunger. Offerings, sacrifices, the words blurred, a testament to her escalating despair. Then I read the last entry, dated mere weeks before her death. It's too strong now, the house. It's weakened. The barriers are failing. It wants him. It wants what he holds. The memory, the fear. It's not enough anymore. It needs more. It needs to break him completely. A floorboard creaked behind me. My head snapped up. Lila sat in the center of the room, her painted smile fixed, her vacant eyes now seeming to hold a glint of something predatory. The scattered toys around her were no longer just toys. They were arranged in a new pattern, a circle, and in the center of that circle, where Lila sat, was a small, tarnished silver locket. My locket. The one I always wore. How had it gotten there? I scrambled back, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. The static from the security monitors downstairs, a constant, low hum I'd barely registered, suddenly felt like a siren's wail. I had to get out of here. But as I turned, my foot caught on something, a loose floorboard. I stumbled, falling back onto the dusty floor, the journal flying from my grasp, and then I heard it. Mine. Was it Lila? Or was it the house itself, finally revealing its true voice? The air in the guard break room, security monitors showing static, hung thick and heavy, smelling of stale coffee and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like old pennies. My hands trembled as I reached for the dusty thermos. It was a futile gesture. My throat felt like sandpaper. The screens flickered, a chaotic dance of white noise and gray fuzz. Each dead pixel seemed to mark me. The silence outside this small, windowless box was the worst. It wasn't an empty silence, but a pregnant one, a held breath that promised to shatter. I told myself it was just the wind, just the house settling. My grandmother's will had been clear. The house and everything in it was mine. A morbid inheritance, especially considering the history. I tried to ignore it, bury it like he had, but Lila refused to stay buried. He was here. I could feel her, a suffocating presence that clung to me like damp wool. The The static on the monitors shifted, coalescing for a fleeting second into shapes that weren't there. Faces, twisted, childish faces with vacant eyes, then back to the snow. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, digging my fingernails into my palms. It was an illusion, a trick of the light, the failing equipment. That's what I had to believe. I'd come down here looking for answers, for a way out. The main doors were locked from the outside. I knew this because I'd tried them. Twice. The heavy oak, usually so easy to swing open, had felt like it was bolted shut from the other side. The windows, too, a stubborn, unyielding barrier. It was as if the house itself had decided I wasn't allowed to leave. My grandmother's journals were scattered throughout the library, filled with her spidery script. Entries about Lila, about keeping her contained. Containment. She'd been so terrified. I hadn't understood it then, a child's fear of a doll. A faint scratching sound. From the hallway. Soft, insistent, like tiny fingernails on wood. It stopped. Then a child's giggle, high and thin, seemed to weave itself into the static. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It was closer, much closer. I scrambled to my feet, knocking the thermos to the floor. The smell intensified. I backed away from the door, my gaze fixed on the blank screens. They were no longer just static. They were mirrors. And in them I saw myself. Or rather, a warped version of me. My mouth was stretched into a silent scream. The scratching returned, louder this time, right outside the door. A soft thud followed, then another, like something small and heavy being dropped. I could feel the sweat prickling my skin, a clammy sheen. I had to get out. I had to find help. But the phones in the house were dead, the landlines silent. My mobile had no signal. The house had become a tomb, and I was its sole occupant, save for her. The door to the guard break room, security monitors showing static, began to creak open, slowly. But I knew what was there. I could feel the weight of her gaze, a palpable pressure that made it hard to breathe. A small porcelain hand, painted with rosy cheeks and impassibly blue eyes, appeared in the widening gap. It was Lila. She didn't move. She just was. A silent, terrifying sentinel. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the leg of a metal chair. It toppled with a deafening clang. Sound reverberated in the small room, a desperate cry in the suffocating quiet. Lila's head tilted, her painted smile never wavering. Then the static on the monitors resolved into a single, clear image. It was the main hall, and standing there, in the dim light filtering through the dusty stained glass, was my grandmother. She looked younger, vibrant, her eyes filled with a familiar, unsettling gleam. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and raised a hand, beckoning me. But her eyes were Lila's. There was this real. There was she truly there, or another of Lila's cruel deceptions. The scratching started again, this time on the inside of the door, directly behind me. The air grew heavy, viscous, making each inhale a struggle. I was trapped. But who or what was holding the key? The static on the security monitors hummed, a low, insistent buzz that scraped against my nerves. The metallic tang in the air, sharp and coppery, seemed to intensify, clinging to the back of my throat. I swallowed, but it did nothing to dislodge the dryness. My fingers, slick with a sheen of sweat, fumbled with the thermos lid. It wouldn't budge. Of course it wouldn't. Nothing was easy anymore. Not since I'd come back here to this suffocating house. I dropped the thermos. It clattered against the linoleum floor, a hollow, mocking sound in the oppressive silence. The metallic smell, I realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't just in the air. It was on my hands, a thin, sticky film that clung stubbornly, no matter how much I rubbed. It reminded me of something I'd tried so hard to forget. The feeling of it, that greasy, warm slickness. The static on the monitors flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shape in one of them. A small, dark silhouette against the grainy gray. My breath hitched. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the usual wash of white noise. Just a trick of the light, I told myself, just my frayed nerves playing games. I pushed myself up from the worn plastic chair. My joints creaked in protest. The floorboards in the hall outside the guard break room groaned under my weight, each step a deliberate effort. I needed to get to the attic. The place where it all began, where I'd first seen her, nestled amongst the forgotten relics of my grandmother's life. The stairs leading up were steep, The wood warped and splintered. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the grimy attic window. It smelled of decay, of things left to rot, and beneath it, faint but persistent, that same metallic scent. I kept my eyes fixed on the landing above, on the single bare bulb that cast a weak yellow glow. The attic door was ajar. I hadn't left it that way. I pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning a mournful tune. Trunks overflowed with yellowed linens, their lace trim brittle with age. A rocking horse, its painted eyes chipped and vacant, stood sentinel in the corner. And there in the center of the room, bathed in the sickly light, sat Lila. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain face unnervingly smooth, her painted eyes wide and unblinking. Her dress, a faded blue lace, was impassably clean, unstained by the dust and decay that surrounded her. She looked expectant, as if she'd been waiting for me. I took a step forward. My foot landed on a loose floorboard. It creaked loudly. Lila's head tilted, a fraction of an inch. A faint, almost imperceptible smile seemed to play on her painted lips. My blood felt like ice water in my veins. "You're still here." Her painted eyes seemed to fix on me, and I felt a familiar pressure building behind my own eyes, a dull ache that threatened to split my skull. The air grew heavy, suffocating. It was the same feeling I'd had all those years ago, the one that had driven me to flee, to try and erase her from my memory. I remembered what the old woman had told me, a hushed warning from my grandmother's past. She feeds on fear. Asterisk, that was the key. Not to fight her, but to starve her, to refuse her the nourishment she craved. I pictured the vibrant colors of my studio, the comforting scent of turpentine and oil paint. I focused on the satisfaction of a finished canvas, the joy of creation. These were mine. These were real. Lila was not. Lila remained, her gaze unwavering, but the power radiating from her felt diminished, like a dying ember. "I can't hurt me anymore," I said, my voice stronger now, though it still trembled. "I'm not afraid of I." A faint, high-pitched giggle echoed in the attic. The metallic smell intensified, acrid and overpowering. My hands began to shake again, my carefully constructed calm threatening to unravel. The giggling stopped. Silence descended, heavier than before. Lila's painted smile seemed to widen, a cruel, knowing curve. A soft, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails on wood. The air in the guard break room tasted like stale coffee and something vaguely metallic, like old pennies. Dust motes danced in the weak light that bled from the ceiling fluorescence, a sickly yellow. I slumped onto a cracked vinyl chair, the plastic cool and clammy against my sweat-dampened trousers. My eyes, I knew, were probably bloodshot, ringed with the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. The guard break room, my sanctuary if I could call it that. A place where I could retreat from the suffocating weight of the mansion, from the whispers that clung to the shadows like cobwebs. The security monitors stared back at me blank, a grid of flickering static. They showed nothing, and yet they showed everything. They were a testament to the emptiness, the vast, echoing void that had swallowed the rest of the house. The giggle, Lila, her name felt like a curse, a brand seared onto my soul. I'd thought I'd dealt with her, banished her back to the suffocating confines of the attic. But the metallic tang in the air, it persisted, a coppery reminder of what had transpired. It was the smell of blood, of something ancient and broken. My hands were still. The tremor had subsided, replaced by a dull ache, a deep-seated weariness that settled into my bones. I'd done what I had to do. The attic, once the epicenter of her suffocating presence, was now silent. The doll. I couldn't bear to look at her, not even now. She lay where I'd left her, a grotesque parody of innocence, her porcelain smile fixed, her button eyes staring into an oblivion that mirrored my own. But the silence was too loud. It pressed in on me, a heavy blanket woven from fear and the lingering scent of decay. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Waiting for what? For me to break, for her to return. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure the faces of the past, the fleeting images that had driven me to this point. My grandmother, her haunted eyes, her hushed warnings. It was all here, in this decaying mansion, woven into the very fabric of the walls. The static on the monitors buzzed, a low, insistent drone. It was a familiar sound, a lullaby of helplessness. I'd spent so long trying to outrun her, to bury the memories so deep they'd never surface. But the inheritance, the return to this place, had unearthed them all. I remembered the moment, the desperate, frantic struggle in the suffocating heat of the attic. The air thick with the cloying scent of dust and something else, something foul. The way her painted smile seemed to widen, to mark me. And then the resolution. A swift, brutal act born of desperation. A sharp, clean edge slicing through the threads that bound her to this world. But the metallic smell lingered. It clung to my clothes, to my skin, to the very air I breathed. It was the scent of something irrevocably changed. I had severed the connection, I had broken the curse, or so I told myself. A faint creak echoed from somewhere in the house. My head snapped up, my eyes darting towards the door. My heart, a traitorous organ, began to thrum a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Was it just the old house settling, or was it something more? The static on the monitors seemed to writhe, the patterns shifting, coalescing into fleeting, unsettling shapes. I blinked, and they were gone, replaced by the familiar, meaningless snow. My mind, I knew, was playing tricks on me. The trauma, the prolonged stress, it was all taking its toll. I stood, my legs stiff and aching. The guard break room felt too small, the air too thick. I needed to get out, to breathe air that didn't carry the ghost of her presence. But where could I go? The house was a cage, and I was its sole, terrified occupant. It wasn't a sound, not really. A single, drawn-out syllable that seemed to coil around my name. Dean. My hand froze. The metallic smell intensified, sharp and biting. A profound, unsettling quiet that promised nothing but more to come. Had I truly vanquished her, or merely set the stage for something far worse?